Welcome back to This Is Working. I'm Dan Roth, Editor-in-Chief of LinkedIn. On this show, we offer the leaders of today an opportunity to share their knowledge with the leaders of tomorrow. Today, my guest is Coltrane Curtis, founder and managing partner of Team Epiphany. Marketing guru Coltrane Curtis was influencing consumer marketing trends well before the term influencer was coined. Once an MTV VJ and fashion commentator, Coltrane gained insights into the making of celebrities and the impact of the network of people who created them. Today, Coltrane brings his mastery of brand strategy and marketing to high-profile clients like Nike, HBO, Audi, and Airbnb. He runs his experiential marketing agency, Team Epiphany, with his wife, Lisa Chu. Coltrane doesn't just focus on helping brands cut through the noise. He's put together a truly multicultural company that isn't afraid to be first when it comes to trying new things and highlighting new ideas. Coltrane, welcome to This Is Working. It's great to have you here.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, so you're looking at almost 20 years for Team Epiphany, one of the largest independent agencies. And I've heard you talk about this idea that brands turn to you for your connection to culture. I'd love to understand your background and how you became someone who sees the sort of threads of what makes culture.
Yeah, well, brands kind of come to me for kind of like decoding culture, right? I think brands have access to a lot of insights and a lot of data, but they can't kind of bring them together to kind of like create a story and find an opportunity to engage with consumers. That's ultimately what we do. It's simplifying it, but that's kind of like what we do. But I really feel like from an agency perspective, our entire piece was about being about culture. So every hire that we make is about, are you an expert about a particular, industry? Do you love culinary? Do you love sport? Do you love style, fashion, right? And so I think the DNA of our agency is to be able to bring people who understand culture and then allow them to work for brands. And that's kind of been our kind of rally cry. When most people hire for a particular skill set, we're really identifying that skill set because we want people to be able to come in and read, write, do all these kind of different things. But the one thing that we really hire for is cultural connectivity and community connectivity also, which is very important when you really think about influencer activation, when you think about multiculturalism. It's about, do you belong to these communities? Do you respect these communities? Do you understand where they're going? Do you understand what they want? And ultimately, we really bring those people together to identify the opportunity for brands to live in a kind of consumer's world. We're kind of disruptors. I think all marketers are disruptors because when you really think about the general cadence of how consumers move through life, what your job is to do is to identify the perfect opportunity for a brand to interrupt that trajectory or that movement of a consumer and figure out the right opportunity to get your brand messaging heard. And the way in which we do that is listening to culture and decoding culture.
Interrupt or be part of it?
I think you have to interrupt it first. I think you have to respectfully interrupt it, right? Like no one wants to hear that record scratch, right? But like if you're mixing it, it's kind of like a cool vibes. But I think that's ultimately what our job is to do, is to kind of like be a part of it ultimately, and to respect it. I think a lot of times, you see a lot of brands and a lot of agencies activating spaces and cultures and communities that they're not a part of.
Right.
That's where brands kind of run awry because that's when your BPMs are off, right? And you can't really mix it right. And so for us, what we try to do is find an organic way for both to live symbiotically. But it's a science, but it's also an art form. And I sit more on the art side, but luckily enough, I have a bunch of like cultural scientists on my team that kind of like blend the two together.
Well, you talk about that expertise, but you're more of a generalist. Would you talk a little bit about how you grew up and how you started becoming part of documenting culture?
Oh, yeah. Well, you got to be a part of it, right? And you got to be a part of it in a real way to not only be in it, but also pull out 30,000, 40,000 feet and see what's actually happening so you can, kind of identify trends that are happening for brands. That's what brands are picking me for, right? Every time, every brand has like a 6-month, 9-month, 12-month, 18-month lead time. And so you need to be able to have that macro piece. But for me particularly, I'm a vision of my dad. My dad was the blueprint for me, literally he passed away almost 10 years ago. And it's kind of, I go back and I look at some of the things that he wrote to me for me to look at now. And it's like, he had that blueprint for me early on. And
what was the blueprint?
The blueprint was really, you want to be able to communicate and be likable, right? And be able to understand, again, the world that you're living in and positioning, right? So my dad started his own agency in our brownstone in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. So I was able to see him grow the agency from multicultural marketing before was not marketing, it was sampling, right?
Mhm.
And so he started, Christian Brothers brandy sampling, cigarette sampling, and I really, saw him building this business, from the ground up from our brownstone, where he grew from an office there to an office, where Dean and DeLucas was on Prince and Broadway,
Mhm.
and then an office in Montclair. And I really saw him build it brick by brick. And I didn't know that that's what I wanted to do, but he built this blueprint for me. So it was more about seeing the world. There was a book that I had to read. I'm not very a religious person, but I'm very a spiritual person. And one of the books that it wasn't really spiritual what he gave me, but it was a book called Positioning, and it's a book that I still keep on my desk to this day, his copy of it. And it was really about what he told me about life. You could position yourself or life will position you. And so from a very young age, I understood strategy versus tactics in a very, very clean kind of way. And so, he allows
This was
me
like
to
a dinner table
I
conversation.
mean, this wasn't even about a dinner table. This is being nice about my dad. Like my dad was extremely militant about it, was very hard laced about it. I probably read that book 100 times. But it was really just taught me about what am I seeing and how to frame it up. And, when you think about framing, right, that's about positioning. And one of the big skills that my dad gave me was photography. So I remember when I went to school, I went to Berkeley Carroll for like middle school, 6th, 7th, 8th grade. And I remember going to
That's a
school
school in Park Slope,
school in
Brooklyn.
Park Slope, Brooklyn, private school. I was the kid that was bused from Bed-Stuy to Park Slope to go to school. But I remember having my basketball bag, my school bag, and a Zero Halliburton bag of cameras.
Hmm.
I shot Canon AE1s, F1s, and that literally allowed me to see the world, to capture the world through black and white and frame things really well. And so as I got to Morehouse, that was very important for me as I got through not just Morehouse, but Atlanta culture, where I actually was the guy in the nightclubs taking photos of all the future kind of like promoters and artists and managers. And that got me in kind of like entertainment. And then I worked at Ralph Lauren while I was at Morehouse. And then that's what brought me back to New York, Jersey, Montclair. And then I met a guy named Mark Milikowski, who turned out to be Mark Echo. And then I was with Mark for a very long time, even when he had Zoo York and Complex. And then I left Complex and I became a VJ for MTV, where I hosted like all these style things. And then from there, interviewing people on the red carpet was just like my dream. Like, and it was about style and fashion and things that I love. But what I quickly realized was that the people that I'm talking to, not the Pharrells of the world, but the general celebrities that I'm talking to, didn't know what they had on, didn't know where it came from. And I was kind of like let down. But what I really understood was that those people were engineered and those people were created by a community and a team of people. And so when I left MTV, I started our agency called Team Epiphany. And the DNA of the agency was everybody wanted me to kind of like create it around celebrity, but it wasn't really like a differentiator for me, right? Like you can go work with, Steve Rifkin at Loud, right? Like you can go work, with, Rob Stone and Fader, right? Like you can go work with these different people who actually had, or Stout, right? Like you actually had a deeper connection to the actual talent in terms of management and creating contracts. But the differentiation point for me, my dad told me that the world doesn't need another agency. What's your differentiation point? And our differentiation point was not just the celebrity, but it was the people who created the celebrity and the ecosystem that built them. And so our philosophy at Team Epiphany is we have access to the network and the teams of people who build celebrity. And if we can empower that network of people to work for brands, we got something. And so that was 2004. And our tagline was "We influence influencers." Talking about being early or too early. We could talk about that later, but we were right on, and still to this day, our business
That was pre-social media. I mean,
that was pre-social media. That was not even a term. That was a real term. Like I think everybody was using like trendsetters or tastemakers. But for me, it was really a big thing because that's where my deep personal connectivity was to all of these stylists and the publicists and the writers and the creative directors. And so ultimately, what we did 19, 20 years ago is what we do now, which is basically empower these kind of creatives to work for brands. And now these people are called influencers or creators or all these different things. But the reality is they drive global culture. And we're basically connected to the hip to this kind of like, this ecosystem that is kind of like blind. You're kind of like most consumers and brand folk are blind to this kind of like community, but the reality is these are the people who are influencing the influencers that you generally find being paid and celebrated today.
But I would think the people that control the spending at these brands look and say, well, I want to be with this celebrity. This person is known in this space.
Right.
Give me the person with the biggest following,
Right.
or the biggest, the hottest TV show or
Right.
movie right now. just have them talk about my brand. Do you get that kind of question?
Yeah, I think we get that kind of question. I think then you have to kind of figure out like, what kind of business am I running? Am I fighting them or am I working with them? And so a lot of times I fought them and that didn't work out too well. But I think that if you can reach their goals, which tend to be a little, I would say low hanging fruit, which is kind of like pay to play. Let's get this person to say something. That's great. But what we've really done for our business is said, okay, cool, we'll do that. But I'm a big basketball fan, but like while we're doing that, it's kind of like a look away pass. And we're going to do all the amazing things that you actually want to happen, but you don't know how to communicate that through a brief or an RFP. So we'll give you the basic, this person said this with that many followers, no question. But then behind the scenes, we're crafting all of these beautiful kind of like strategies and tactical things that kind of like allow the brand to actually, consumers actually engage with the brand, instead of just like talking about the brand. And so ultimately what we are engagement experts, not just kind of like tertiary kind of like, I would just say, top level, just engagement kind of people.
All right, we have a lot of people in the stream right now joining, people from the marketing and creative space. So Eric Erickson in New York, Liam Darmody from North Carolina, Shayna Delgado from Brooklyn, Jerry L. Allison in Tennessee, and Paolo, excuse me if I messed up your last name here, Mazzacochi in Italy. A lot of people tuning in for this. So what would you say, Coltrane, for people who are, let's say you're running a small business, medium-sized business, you can't afford a Team Epiphany, or you want to do this on your own, what is the way business owners or people in marketing should be thinking about becoming part of culture, getting that connection to culture?
Right. I think you have to really honestly figure out, like, honestly, what is your way in, right? What is your skill? How do you make the space better? What is your differentiation piece, right? Someone might be a photographer, right? And that might be your ecosystem. What you really need to really figure out is, what do you do differently? What do you do better? And stick to that. Like, I think being big and large shouldn't be our initial goal. Otherwise, you're going to really miss all the building blocks in terms of what makes you you, and you need to identify that first.
You're saying if you're running a company, you're running a brand, do not think about how big you can go. Don't think about blowing up. You want to become you want to grow up, basically.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it took me 20 years to get to 100 people. I had many opportunities to take on investors from my business and haven't. We own our agency 100% to this point, me and my wife. And so when you really think about it, we get the opportunity to grow organically, to grow at our pace, and to grow at the pace of the opportunities that we want to take. And I think the opportunities we want to take, this is funny coming from a guy whose clients are like Lego and, Coca-Cola and HBO, right? Like, it took us a very long time to get there, and I think you have to actually, this was saying cliche, but I think you actually have to enjoy the voyage and the mission and the experience of getting there. Like, because once you're there, it's not as exciting, right? Because you're having to manage 100 people, you have to manage multiple offices, you have to manage your healthcare provider and your insurance company, like all these different things. And that's not what I signed up for. What I signed up for and what I'm really great at is, creating opportunities for brands to speak to consumers. And so what I would say is really just think small and think passionately and do that extremely well, because that's what brands actually need. They need experts. Right? They need experts, and they will find you. And, that's what we've actually done. And so there are not too many clients that we started very largely with, right? Like, we have a lot of clients at the agency that we've been with for 8, 10. We have some clients we've been with for 15 years. And so it takes a long time to build that trust. The same way it takes a long time to build trust within the consumer set and the communities that you're marketing to. And so for me, I would say start small, and be passionate, because there are going to be a lot of days when there are going to be a lot of, squeaky wheels and ceiling leaks. And, you have to come back to, do I really want to do this? And so, my business, made it through COVID. We were very highly, probably 50, 60% of our income at that particular point in time was experiential. Right. And then here comes COVID. What's going to happen? The agency came out of COVID stronger and bigger, better, badder, but we had to go back to, this was our passion. This is what we wanted to do. And so that's what made us be able to traverse all types of, difficulties and challenges of running the business. But I would really say be passionate. And then the other thing is really being able to bring in people and community and friends into your business that, one, you love, you trust, and the skill sets aren't really overlapping. That's the one thing that I think that I've done extremely well over the last 20 years, is being able to build an internal community of talent, but people who can see things differently, and have different skill sets, right? And so you don't really want to overlap skill sets. So there's not too many people that look like me in my agency, and they're not too many people that look like the person that's to the right of me. You know, diversity is very big for us. We're 70% minority, 70% female. And I still tout diversity as being diversity of thought, right? And understanding how so many people can look at one particular object and see them all differently. That's really where the magic happens.
Can you talk about how that diversity of thought plays into actually launching an experience or something that you're doing with the brand? What's the, how do you bring everyone in? I assume that it's not everyone in the company is invited to or is part of every single launch or project you do, or am I wrong about that? How do you make sure you get that diversity?
Yeah, man, I think like over, you know, at first I think, you know, you give people an opportunity. You have to understand, I'm a marketer externally, but I'm also a marketer internally, right? And you have to think about, why do people want to be at Team Epiphany? You know, people want to be at Team Epiphany because I'm not some crazy creative director that's taking credit for everything, right? I'm actually taking credit for nothing. I'm the person that wants to be like, hey, I didn't do this. Look at who did this, right? And so the first thing you have to understand is that people want to see their work in the world, right? And people want to also be able to show their parents what they actually put into the world, right? And so for me, I think it's really about maintaining the fact that I do not have the answer, but it's my job to get the answer. And a lot of times, most agencies have to go external. For us, we start internally. And so, you know, if we're working on an influencer program per se, right? You know, most shops are like, this is my influencer list, and these are the people we manage. It's like, that's not who we are, right? Like, influence is who we are. It's not what we do, it's who we are. And so when people at the agency or when brands actually come to us to put these lists together, an email goes out to the entire agency. And then we ask, hey, who's interested in, who's knowledgeable? Can you identify 10, 15, 5, 2, 1 person that can actually work for this particular program? And so just
Lego, Audi, Adidas, someone comes to you and the first thing you do is you put out this kind of call and you say, we need to know who can talk about this.
100%. Who can do it credibly, who's a part of the consumer set, who's a true fluencer in this particular space, not the person with the most followers, not the person with the cool TikTok or the YouTube channel. Like, who is the person truly that's moving the needle for this particular community culture brand? And so we reach out to the entire agency. And so a person that might be on my production team or somebody that might be on my account leadership team gets the opportunity to help feed the insights that then go back to my strategy team that then builds the kind of like pathway forward. And so it's our job to get the answer right. Right. And if we're culturalists, everyone has to be that way. And so I still sit on, after 20 years, I still sit on every single job interview, right? How does that happen? You know, there are a couple rounds, I might be in the 3rd round, but I'm not checking to see if like your formulas are adding up on Excel. That's not my skill set, right? What I'm really trying to figure out is what particular part of culture are you an expert at? So this way, when I'm getting a brief, I understand who I can deploy across that. And because I own my own agency, you know, there's 100 of us, I can put 100 people on a particular project. You know, my business managers probably don't want to hear that. But the reality is if we're locked in to get this challenge done and get the work done right, like I got to put every single person on the field. Like, that's my job. And that's what I laddered up to when I took the piece of business. And so we hire first for culture, you know, and, you know, I think we're doing well. I think it does well for us. We can't do what all the other big agencies do. I can't get into the hiring game against a Wyden or Droga or one of these big cats, you know, like what I got to really do is figure out where's my way in, you know, like our strategy team, you know, they're all published writers. You know, Courtney, who sits on that team, she just got a 2-book deal. You know, she's a novelist and she's been with us for 10 plus years, you know, like I'm so excited about that. Right. And so what's great about that is that, you know, the person that might respond to your brief might be the person that's helping you write your tagline, might be helping you write your copy in social. Right. But it's the same person. And so, you know, it's just an incredible skill set that we have. Like, even like our account leaders, I don't call them managers. Right. No one wants a manager of your millions of dollars of business. They're leaders. But the majority of them are ex-publicists. Why? Because account leadership is about communication, and comm specialists can communicate on a red carpet, can communicate on a keynote, right? And so the difference is that we employ publicists who don't want to pitch toilet paper anymore, who are great communicators. Now they're driving business. And so this way, everything that we do has a penchant for amplification. So things that we've done work for us. It's not going to work for somebody else. And I didn't try to create another agency. I just try to create who we are. And, you know, if the term agency sticks, then we're an agency, I guess, you know.
And how do you think about, you mentioned being very early into this idea of influencer. Now that everyone has adopted this idea, once something becomes mainstream, it can't last, right? I mean, what is the next? Where are we in terms of
Right.
talking to influencers, using influencers in marketing? What's the next thing to come out of it?
Yeah, I mean, this is a big hole for me, right? We could do this for hours, right? I think going back to the term of influence is not what you do, it's who you are. And if you understand people who are influencing culture, generally aren't on social talking about, look at me and look how I influence culture, right? They're actually doing the work, right? And so what we really try to find are people who are moving the needle forward. I think nowadays when we're looking at influencer marketing, it's just another form of paid media, right?
Mhm.
Let's be honest about it, right? And so if you're looking for metrics and numbers and reach, cool. But if you're looking for engagement and trust and loyalty that drives consumption, what we're seeing right now is not influencer marketing, right? A lot of times brands go to agencies and they're like, hey, I have the capability of doing influence, right? The only reason why they have that capability in this day and age is because they have a budget to pay for it. For us, influence is all earned. And our access to influence allows us to do a bunch of things. Influence is in everything that we do as an agency. So one particular agency might use a said talent to be on stage or perform or do something. Like that piece of talent might be helping us inform our strategy, might be helping us find a local vendor, might be telling us a bunch of insights about that market, right? And that's because there's a deep rooted relationship, right? Influencer marketing is about trust. Right? Like if I asked you like, hey, like I love these black low top 72, you know what I'm saying, dunks in size 10. I mean, blazers in size 10, right? Like, okay, cool. I got that. That's your piece, right? But I want to be able to find people that are experts about that, that can talk about that, that understand that piece. And
Yeah.
so, like influence is about trust. I trust you now that you're influencer about sneakers. But hey, if I knew that you were paid to tell me that this is what I need to do, that whole process is distrustworthy, right? And so literally when I think about influence, if you're paying for it, it's completely opposite of the direction that you need to go for trust. No one trusts someone who's paid to give them a message. And that's a big piece for us.
First, I just want to say I really hope I'm not influencing anyone's fashion.
I mean,
So let's
it's a
let's
good
just make
look.
that
It's a
clear.
good look. I mean, we're in New York, but you're giving me definitely, like, in the Boston Garden vibes with those. I'm about that.
But you've talked about this idea when you and I talked before this. You mentioned that word of mouth is the most
Yeah.
important kind of marketing,
Yes.
and that influencer marketing is turned from at one point it was word of mouth to now becoming just paid
100%.
marketing. So how do you get back to word of mouth? How do you do word of mouth in a world that demands scalability?
I think what you have to understand is that if you give it a second to breathe and incubate it properly, you can do both. The way in which we really look at word of mouth marketing, which is really what truly influencer marketing is that you can co-create and create something that you can then implement paid on. Nowadays, what's happening is that paid is the only tool. And so this way you're amplifying something that's not created to solve your particular brand challenge. Right. And so that's the piece that I think that we really lock in on, is that for us, everything that we do is earned. We probably 97% of the projects that we worked on had to be earned. You look at them and see how they perform and you think that they were all paid, but the reality is that they were earned. And so when you can create these things in culture, then you can go back to the budgets and then you can go back to the paid and then amplify what you created. But for us, it really starts on a bedrock of earning that way into the world, right? And that's the big piece. And so brands always want to accelerate kind of like their brand adoption, right? Like no question, like let's the answer is always yesterday, right? And so a lot of times you overlook all the building blocks that you need to build a strong building or a foundation. And so what we like to say is that we build a foundation within communities and culture through influence, that no matter where your brand goes, that your brand is now sturdy.
Right.
And not doing that is almost like you're building on tectonic plates here, right? And your building can kind of sway and move. And so the reality is that influence should be in everything that you do. And what's also great is that you also have a built-in community, right? And so when things don't go to the plan, you also have people that can vouch for you and your intent inside of culture.
Speaking of the sort of long-term thinking, one of the other things that sets Team Epiphany apart is the retention of your
Yes.
people. You have people who've worked for you for a really long time.
Yes.
That is unusual in the marketing world. 11 and a half years, I think, for your senior staff, like 3.5 years on average for your junior staff.
Yes.
Two questions. What makes people stick around?
Yeah.
And then two is, how do you ensure that you are getting the best or that they are taking risks when people have been around for a long time?
Well, 100%. So I think, why do people stay around? One, I give them the opportunity to do the work. I give them an opportunity to fail up. I give them the same opportunities I've had in my career. And I think, by the older team being here for senior staff being here for about 11 plus years, not any one of those people are in the same position when they started at the agency. They grew, Jared, who runs my strategy team, who's my best friend in the world, he decided to create the strategy team, right? Because he was trying to figure out his place. He knew that this is what we needed. Most brands were coming to us, well, why are these activations perfect and why are they right? It's because we're strategically sound. And so he built out that division. And then, over the next year, he's going to build out this data and this insight kind of division. So he's consistently growing. Val, who's my GM, started as my first PR hire, right? And so the real reason why I think people stay is, one, they get the opportunity to work and be challenged and see their work in the world. But I also see that they see the trajectory of others and know that you can kind of create your own thing within Team Epiphany, and it's people who have unique skill sets and will find a place for you, right? And that's what talent is, right? Like, if we're playing basketball, I got to run an offense that, that supports the staff and the team and the crew that I got on the court. And so that's one of the reasons why I really think. And I think the other piece is, starts from the top down, hard work, right? I'm not preaching work hard, and I'm not in the office. My wife, Lisa, is not preaching work hard and she's not in the office. I started the agency without my wife, and 6 months later, I realized I didn't know how to run a business, but what I realized was that I can throw a party and she can produce an event. And then she came on and she ran the events team, and now she runs the business and the events team, right? And so you can actually see yourself through the people who have been at the agency. So if you're day one, you can look up the hill and see people who've been for 19 years and have a conversation with them, have a dialogue with them. It's a very open door situation. I'm very also transparent about the business.
Yeah.
And I'm also very transparent about, what people want. Sometimes people have to leave. Sometimes when those people leave, they come back.
Right.
Right. I think the biggest piece that warms my heart is that even some of those people who leave and don't come back, one of the big telling points about our agency is, sometimes when they come back in town and their mom or dad are here, they bring their family. Like, I've had literally like
people who are no longer employed there.
We'll bring their family, be like, this is where I got started.
Right.
I needed you. You never met, and these type of things,
Yeah.
because this is where you learn,
Yeah.
And so in marketing, you can go to grad school, cool, or you can come to Team Epiphany and become ill at what you do, because the only way to learn is literally on the battlefield, right? Lace them up, and we're going to go to war and we're going to figure it out. But
got it. So continuity, being able to find your own path, and then also seeing that this hard work kind of pays off.
100%.
Coltrane, you mentioned some of the changes that came to your agency after the pandemic. One of the other things we saw in the pandemic was a real rise in companies understanding that they had to rethink how they've reached out to communities of color.
Yes.
As a multicultural agency, I would assume that there was and tell me if I'm wrong here, there was a kind of a flood of people saying, hey, fix my problem. I've got nothing in this area. Epiphany, can you please help me with that? I'm curious whether that stuck, or what you saw now looking back on it, what you experienced and how companies either made mistakes or figured out the right ways to reach communities, Black and Latino communities that they maybe had never reached before.
Right. Well, I think brands not reaching out to Black and Latino communities of color has been around since the day zero, right? It's a consumer who's always been overlooked. It's a consumer whose spending power has been overlooked. And I would say the community's influence on general culture has often been overlooked, and through COVID, through Black Lives Matter, obviously, it was an opportunity for brands to understand this and figure out, like, okay, we need to get back to this community because we need to continue to build these brands. But generally what happens is they look at engagement within communities of color and in communities of influence, it's kind of like an adrenaline boost, right? And it's kind of like or NOS if you're racing cars, right? And you hit it, you're there. And then when you get back in the race, you get back up off the throttle, right? The brands that get it right are the brands that don't have a separate, multicultural strategy. And it's just a general market strategy that includes these communities of color, because that's basically what drives gen market, right? And that's kind of like the bigger challenge here. But through COVID for us, there's so many brands that came to us. And I think for us, we had to really figure out and look in the mirror and be like, do we actually really want to help this brand?
Right.
Like, because we have the opportunity to keep the lights on for them or turn them off, because this is the time to go. And this is where the rubber meets the road. And we had to really identify, like, hey, Like, do we want to do this for this brand? You know, have they supported us? Have they supported our community? Or are they just looking for that adrenaline boost to kind of like get them over the hump? And so what we have to do is identify the ones that we wanted to work for, you know, and we work for the ones that supported us, you know, the ones that when COVID started, they weren't the first call was like, we have to stop this retainer. This is you got 3 more months. And, you know, like we can't, right. The ones that supported us, we supported them. And those are the only ones that we did. And we continue to work with them throughout. So, you know, I think for us, it's just more about intent. It's more about, do you respect these communities?
Did you see people that didn't have the intent? Did you have
I
brands come to
totally,
you that are
100%,
like,
100%,
right.
you know, 100%. And you could tell that it was a transactional piece, and we just didn't want to be involved with that. And so what we were able to do is make it through. But I think brands that didn't align with the way in which we look at multiculturalism, which is aspirational multiculturalism.
And would you define that?
It's just more about understanding the marketing to the best attributes of a community and destination, and understanding, you know,
Not where they
what
are
this
today,
community aspires to
right.
be, what they aspire for their children, what they aspire for their world that they live in. If you're marketing to that, it's kind of like, you know, we could talk about football, but it's kind of like throwing a football, right? You want to throw the football, you want to lead the receiver, you have to read the defense, and you want to lead the receiver, right? A lot of times when brands are marketing to, you know, communities of color, they're marketing to dormant insights, you know, negative ones, surface level at best. And what we like to do is go a little deeper, right? Like there's this one brand that we're working with. I won't blow them up right now, but, you know, they're like, you know, Black men love basketball. Okay, cool. That might be true. Okay, let's say that. But what's the nuance? Is it gaming? Is it, you know, or do we want to be like Mav or you know, or Rich Paul? Do we like the executive side of it? And there was no depth to the insight. And so this way, that's the reason why you get these kind of like really basic kind of campaigns and strategies talking to communities of color. And that's the ultimate reason why I started the agency, because those don't speak to me. I'm pretty deep guy, I think, you know, I'm quite nuanced. And so what we're really trying to think when we say aspirational marketing to communities of color or aspirational multiculturalism, it's really speaking to those nuances and those in-depth insights that allow you to create a better strategy. And so we were looking for brands that supported that, and brands that did, we helped through COVID, and brands that didn't, you know, they probably didn't make it through. Good luck to them.
Coltrane Curtis, thank you for joining us here today. This is terrific.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
So if you enjoyed this episode, you can find more like it anywhere that you listen to podcasts. We put this out as a podcast. You can get advice from the world's top leaders by subscribing to the newsletter as well. You can see the link right there on the screen. Today, LinkedIn News also launches our new flagship series called Catalyst. This is about the moments in people's career journeys that help them turn setbacks into success. Here is a sneak peek.
I was shocked.
It was bad. It was very bad.
Tears just came down my face.
That voice was telling me you're not good enough.
We only had a few weeks before we would miss payroll.
I had no idea of what life in prison really meant. I knew that I wasn't going to let the circumstance of what was happening to me define me.
If you're where you're supposed to be, all that stuff is worth it.
You cannot take a huge step back and expect that someone else is going to catch you up.
I decided to take control.
Maybe there's more than one way to do things correctly.
The possibilities are endless.
And light bulb clicks off.
And that's how everything changed.
Change.
And that's how everything changed.
The first episode features an astronaut turned artist turned astronaut again. Check out the link my producers are putting in the comments right now, and be sure to subscribe to the newsletter Catalyst. I'm Dan Roth. Thanks for watching. This is Working.